Constantine, hit us with it. What are we talking about today?
So today, as you and I work with, sort of older adolescents, a big thing that comes up is adolescents, almost like young adults, leaving for college. And that's always a concern. It's always a concern for everybody involved, for the adolescent, for the parents, to friends, to grandparents. Everybody has opinions and feelings that are involved. So I thought it might be worthwhile, kind of from our point of view, to dissect it a little bit. Maybe talk about like what are the takeaways that might be worthwhile.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this happens every year. Right. I'll have anywhere between 3 and 6. Depending on the year, obviously. 18 or however year olds going off to college.
Right.
Always an interesting time. I can give you the rundown on how it usually works.
Sure.
As summer is winding down and coming to a close, they begin to start thinking about college coming up, which makes sense. And in the therapy room, I might, kind of bring it up and say, hey, there's a big transition coming up. There's a big change coming up. What are we thinking and feeling about it? Oftentimes, these kids don't want to talk about it at all. They say, oh, what are you talking about? I'm enjoying my summer. Don't bother me with that. And it's challenging for them to kind of wrap their mind around and process all of the feelings that come along with this. Now, I'll say maybe 50% actually do spend the time to sit with the thoughts and the feelings and what they imagine it's going to be like, and transitioning into school looks one way, and also sometimes kids do not spend any time thinking about this, and those feelings can hit them like a ton of bricks.
When does that happen? Right before they leave, you feel like, or they kind of call you 2 weeks into the semester?
Oh, move-in day.
A move day. Wow.
Yeah, right. Just one example. I remember this was a couple of years ago. I was chatting with this young guy, and college is coming up. How are you feeling? We're nervous. He's like, yeah, no, I'm fine. And I'm like, are you sure? Big change comes a lot of anxiety. Maybe you might feel homesick. No, it'll be fine. On the way to college, threw up in the car because he was so anxious, and it's like, no. And move-in day, right? When mom and dad say goodbye, there's that last hug, and then they leave, and the door shuts, and boom, it's sort of like tears, and I can't do this. I have to come home. I don't want to do this anymore. It's almost like a little catastrophe, right? So yeah, talk about a big change. Talk about a grieving process. Going away to college for kids, it's a good change, but it's a tough change.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't agree more. What I notice is that I typically work with older, just clients in general. So potentially you are seeing the adolescent, the kid, that's and the challenges that come on that. And I typically see, the parents, right? They're in their maybe very, very late 40s, probably most likely, early to mid 50s, depending on the situation. And, they also have an enormous amount of feelings, right? The empty nest kind of thing that's been around forever. And one thing, as potentially some of the listeners know, I typically work with either men or couples, and within when I work with couples, I use what's called emotionally focused therapy, and not to go on a tangent what it is, but the big part of it is identifying emotional needs. And what I think is what I try to do when I work with parents or a parent is try to expand a little bit about what is it that's changed. They try to go with well, I'm going to miss my son or my daughter or this, that, and the other. But I try to challenge them a little bit more. But what is it about your child leaving that's difficult for you? And oftentimes we find something like my identity as a parent is no longer there, right? Or this need to take care of, right? To nurture is a big part for parents, right? That is kind of no longer there to the same degree, right? And again, talk about loss and talk about being able to grieve something, right? That need, that first of all is part of who we are. And the one that we were exercising, let's call it 17, 18, 19 years, all of a sudden, in a way, kind of like moving day, abruptly ends on moving day, because obviously you have phone calls and video and visiting, but it's not the same. but it's not the same. So what I do on the parent end is try to identify, let's think about these emotional needs, just for identity's sake, for acceptance sake, because we can't really let go of something if we don't know what it is, if we can't put words to it, right? So what I do is try to help parents identify what it might be like. And it sounds like for yourself, what you hopefully, what's happening is the kid can identify, wow, it's challenging because I have been nurtured, right? It's a safe environment at home, but now all of a sudden none of that exists. Now I kind of have to figure a lot more for myself. So I always encourage, can we just have a conversation about it? It doesn't have to be even in a therapy setting, just like, hey, I've taken care of you all my life, and this is difficult for me. I'm proud, and it's also difficult for me because it's a big part of who I am, right? It doesn't, notice, I didn't, it's not a therapy session. Just like, say that there's a piece of you, there's a need that's going to be missing for you,
right?
And that I'm very proud. Like that's all I'm pulling people to say.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the whole point about this is, like normalizing these feelings,
right?
Like, yeah, it's a change, but it's and it's a good change, right? I don't think anyone's like, oh, I got into college,
right?
Ugh.
Right.
Well, I don't know, maybe some point, but whatever. That's beside the point. It's a good change, and it's also truly difficult,
right?
Because needs that have been met in one way are now no longer met. Is basically what I'm hearing you say,
right? And
that change, that switch, it's a challenging thing, and we need to kind of figure out how to meet those needs again.
Exactly.
And it doesn't happen in a day or a week, and so as I've witnessed so many of these kids have this like tidal wave of emotion just like hit them on move-in day or the day after move-in day or moments after mom and dad leave, being able to hopefully people listening to this are able to listen to this as it's happening or even before and just really normalize all of this.
Right.
Know that you're going to go through it. Know that it's going to be a little challenging, and also know that everyone gets through it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think it's such a critical thing to be able to talk about, because it makes, again, kind of piggybacking a little bit on our conversation earlier, right? It's a great change. It's a difficult change. It's maybe an unspoken change because, most people go to college or trade some sort of a trading school or something like that. So something has changed, or they're just moving out. Whatever the case may be, it doesn't necessarily have to be college. But like just being able to say that, hey, this is a change and maybe a loss of emotional needs being satisfied for both people, for the child to be nurtured and for the parent to nurture. They're important needs of who we are. We can't get rid of them. They're always there. So if we can know what they are, if we can verbalize them and talk about it, it's much easier to shift to something else.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just such an easy but such an important thing to do that I feel like most people don't do. And then I see adults that have the emptiness, I don't know what to do. Now this change has happened. And then they go, maybe for years, trying to figure out what the new value is like without really tapping in what the emotional need was to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, you're just really using like EFT language here. Like I could just like really hear you saying it, right? But yeah, and one of the great things that I'm certainly not an expert on EFT, but from having heard about it and knowing a bit about it, tapping into those emotional needs, like it's like that's all that it is, and normalizing and just being able to like identify them, name them, talk about them.
Right.
That is just a completely fantastic first step in the right direction that almost no one ever takes.
They don't, because what I notice, especially from parents that are really invested in their child and the well-being, is that sometimes when I bring it up, they shift the conversation. No, it's not about me. It's about my son or my daughter, about her doing well. And that's absolutely true. I don't want to take away from the fact that little Billy is doing well. Can we just acknowledge that something's happening for you too? Like, we're not taking away from the fact that he's leaving and you're proud and that it's not about your feelings. And at the same time, can we say that you're having feelings about it just so that it's easier to own it?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to, because what I see sometimes happen is that the parent then didn't identify that, but still puts it on the kid. Right? Like, how come you're not coming back for Christmas? How come you're not coming back for this? How come you're not calling me back as much as I would like? Where are you? Right? Like, so then unidentified feeling, all of a sudden, not to use fancy therapy words, but like projects onto the kid their need without really being acknowledged, right? And then there's pressure and guilt and shame and all sorts of, and it kind of gets in the way of the dynamic rather than just saying, you had needs, I had needs, can we just acknowledge them and figure out how that could work, right? Like, so that often is the challenge for when I work with parents, they just don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Or they have I don't say don't want to. They have a challenging time accepting that it's okay to feel that you have feelings. Well, I don't want to be selfish about it. I'm not asking you to be selfish. Just saying, like, can we say that you have feelings about it aside from your kid, that it fulfilled something for you taking care of a child? Like, it's not, to me, it's not that big of a stretch, but I do notice that conversation often takes a little bit. So for some of the listeners out there, just be mindful, just acknowledge how you feel about it. And also, if you're up for it, just share it. Like, there's nothing wrong will happen if you begin to put that self out there. I think everybody would benefit, and you're more likely not to fuck up your kids' experience there with creating guilt for them rather than having a more pleasant interaction. Yeah. I don't know. Those are my 2 cents.
I think if we could just cut that like sound bite out and just like plop it on some people's some parents' phones, that would be perfect. Because I think a lot of people need to hear that.
That's the hope.
I really do like what you said and how you said it. I think that's hugely important. And a lot of people just completely out of their awareness, exactly what you just said.
Awesome.
So I think that brings us to the last call.
Last call is this. It's okay to have feelings. You don't have to hyper focus on your kid, because you're not really doing anyone's favors to anybody, not to the kid and definitely not to yourself. So just acknowledge that the kid has emotional needs, you have emotional needs, and it's an interaction between those two needs. That's it. Like, you could think of it as very cerebral or very mathematical. Like, that person has something, you have something, just want to talk about it. Just acknowledge it to yourself. And your relationship with your child that's going away is going to be 1,000 times better for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yourself?
Mine is this. If there's any young adult out there getting ready to go to college, my ask is to spend some time thinking about it. Right. I've heard and worked with so many people who intentionally did not think about it and avoided it, and it hit them like a freight train on move-in day or the day before move-in day, and it's pretty ugly. Right. But if we're able to start thinking about this stuff in June, July, kind of like wrapping our mind around it, getting a little bit more used to it, typically things go a little bit smoother on move-in day, and those emotions don't come absolutely out of nowhere. So my last goal is to think about this change that's coming up, because it's coming up.
Right. Awesome. All right, guys. As always, thanks so much.